أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the 20th century, the theory of evolution was refuted not only by molecular biology, but also by paleontology, that is, fossil science.
You may be surprised to know that the fundamental assumptions upon which evolutionary thinking is based are not at all confirmed by paleontology.
The theory argues that first, the unicellular living beings were formed, which then in hundreds of millions of years turned into marine invertebrates and fish, respectively. These fish later had supposedly emerged onto land and turned into reptiles. The story goes further and says that birds and mammals evolved from reptiles. For this claim to be true, there ought to have been numerous intermediary species, linking one living species to another. For instance, if reptiles truly had evolved into birds, then countless half-bird, half-reptile creatures ought to have lived at one time or another. And these intermediary creatures complete half-developed organs. Darwin called these hypothetical creatures transitional forms. He knew that in order to support his theory, the remains of such intermediate forms had to be found in the fossil record.
The fact is that after nearly 2 centuries of intense research, the paleontological evidence for evolutionary theory is not only rare, but highly questionable. The point is that if evolution had really happened, the evidence would be in great abundance and incontestable. The museums would be overflowing with fossils, clearly documenting the transitions between the various biological groups. Yet there are none. Moreover, there is no indication that the situation will change in the future. Those very few fossils which are claimed to show some kind of evolutionary link, such as the amphibians Ichthyostica and Simoria, the reptile Proponognathus, the bird Archaeopteryx, and the Australopithecine ape called Homo habilis are very far from conclusive.
There have been a few fossils that were touted as transitional forms by evolutionists, but later turned out to be nothing of the sort. One of the most important of these alleged transitional forms was the fossil of a fish called a coelacanth. For years, evolutionists claimed that this creature, which was only known in the fossil record, had characteristics similar to those of land-dwelling animals. It had, they argued, primitive legs and a primitive lung. These evolutionists' claims about the coelacanth were advanced as a scientific fact, and imaginary drawings picturing the animal crawling onto land from water made their way even to textbooks. It came as a great shock to evolutionists when a living example of the supposedly extinct coelacanth was caught in the Indian Ocean in 1938. It was then seen that the fish was no different from the fish of our day. Contrary to the claims of evolutionists, coelacanths had neither legs nor primitive lungs. What was worse, the coelacanth, supposedly a creature readying itself to make the leap from sea to land, was in reality a fish that lived only in the deep waters of the oceans, never approaching to within 180 meters of the surface. Another alleged transitional form has been a fossil bird called Archaeopteryx. For decades, evolutionists argued that this creature was an intermediary between reptiles and birds. However, the seventh Archaeopteryx fossil, discovered in 1992, revealed that the creature had a sternum. That is, the chest bone essential for flight muscles. This proved that the animal was a perfect flying bird. The evolutionist claims about the claw-like nails on the wings of the Archaeopteryx also failed, since similar structures were also discovered in modern birds like the Hoatzin. Because of such reasons, one of the foremost defenders of the theory of evolution, the Stephen Jay Gould, had to admit that Archaeopteryx could not be considered as a transitional form.
Archaeopteryx, classified today by many paleontologists as a true bird, not a reptile bird intermediary, was the first of a number of deceptive schemes promoting evolutionary ideas. Evolutionists misdated and misidentified this extinct bird, presuming it to be the missing link between reptiles and birds.
The best example of a transitional form that my evolutionary friends usually give is Archaeopteryx, a supposed link between the reptiles and the birds. Recently, another bird has been found, dated by evolutionists, to be 75 million years older than Archaeopteryx. So therefore, Archaeopteryx could certainly not be the ancestor of the birds. Actually, evolutionists don't have any idea how the reptiles evolved into birds. They don't have any of these transitional forms. But that doesn't stop them. You pick up any book on evolution, and Archaeopteryx is still presented as the best evidence.
Faced with these realities made clear by the fossil record, evolutionists directed all their attention to the claim that man evolved from ape-like creatures. 6,500 different ape species have lived so far, and the majority of them are extinct. The skulls of these extinct apes, both big and small, constituted a great resource for evolutionists on which to exercise their imaginations freely. Arranging the skulls of these extinct ape species from the smallest to the biggest, and adding some skulls of vanished human races to the series, evolutionists concocted the scenario of human evolution. The most important role of this scenario is given to the extinct ape species called Australopithecus.
I have been investigating the so-called missing link between man and ape for many years, and I have found that every single one of them simply is no link whatsoever. For example, Australopithecus, the skeleton of Lucy, this really consists only of a 40% skeleton of a not very large ape, and they have not got any evidence that it ever walked upright in any of the bones that they have found of that skeleton.
The interesting thing about that is that Lucy is shown as being distinctly human-like. She's very erect in her posture, she's got human-like hands, human-like feet. I'm not quite sure where exactly the restorers got this data from, because if you examine the paper by Randall and Sussman, which described the type of species to which Lucy belongs, they said quite clearly that she had long, curved hands and feet, even longer and even more curved than a chimpanzee. Several distinguished anatomists, for example, Australopithecus, the genus to which Lucy belongs, was simply an extinct ape, nothing at all to do with humans.
Evolutionists hypothesized that Australopithecus walked upright on its 2 feet, differently from other apes. However, two world-renowned anatomists, Lord Solly Zuckerman and Professor Charles Oxnard, refuted this allegation. Simply put, Australopithecus, advanced as the ancestor of man by evolutionists, is merely an extinct ape species. On the other hand, fossils that are included by evolutionists under imaginary classifications, such as Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, or Homo sapien archaic, in fact belong to different human races. When these fossils are inspected, it is seen that their skeletons are essentially the same as those of people living today. The only dissimilarities are a few structural differences in their skulls. But differences like these are to be found in different human races alive on Earth today. The famous evolutionist paleontologist Richard Leakey admits that the difference between the skulls classified as Homo erectus and those of modern men is only racial. These differences are probably no more pronounced than we see today between the separate geographical races of modern humans.